No, wait a minute. Alright, boring stuff out of the way first. I'm counting seals, staves, and torches to keep consistency with other lists in the past. So yes, Lamenting Visage, and yes, Nanaya's torch. I'm also counting previous items that already had their own dedicated list, including shields, because the Carian Thrusting Shield probably takes most S-tier weapons in this video behind the Denny's parking lot for a DIY lobotomy, and it felt incredibly unfair not to include it. Even if most shields don't really work as weapons unless you're running a counterattack build. This brings us to a massive total of 102 DLC weapons. Some may say there are 95, some would say there are only 80. I like to call those people telemarketers, because they're probably using their brevity and respect for your time as leverage to sell you merch or a book they wrote or something. Or an opportunity to get some free shit in War Thunder. War Thunder has a collection of over 2,500 different tanks, cruisers, battleships, attack choppers, fighter jets, and other vehicles from 10 major nations. And it's available on PC, console, and mobile devices right now. Blowing up fuckers with high-velocity, armor-piercing ballistic shells has been a beloved pastime for pretty much anyone who grew up playing Modern Warfare 2. And War Thunder is proof that the system has only advanced ever since. War Thunder even allows you to use vehicles from other time periods, so if you ever wanted to blow up an MBT-70 with a fucking biplane from the 1920s, then this is probably the only game that'll ever let you do that, so that's pretty cool. Every vehicle has an incredible amount of detail, personal customization, and even an additional X-ray view that allows you to see exactly where and how your vehicle was damaged if something hits you. The graphics are incredible, and the sound effects are actually scarily authentic. Like, I was just reviewing the B-roll here and I heard something explode, and I actually had to rewind the clip just to make sure it wasn't like a transformer exploding outside or something. The player base clocks in at over 70 million concurrent players, and it has probably one of the most dedicated military history communities of any other game like it. War Thunder is available for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and even mobile devices. Sign up using my link, and both new and previous players who haven't played in 6 months receive a bonus pack shot on PC and consoles that comprises multiple premium vehicles, an exclusive vehicle decorator, and 10,000 silver lions for a limited time only. The bottom 5 on most of these is usually just as grueling a choice as the top 5 because there's an entirely different list of criteria they tend to go by. In order to be considered worst of the worst, being a bad weapon with bad damage just isn't enough. The worst entries on any list are uncompromising in their uselessness, and more visually uninteresting than a kindergarten watercolor painting. And with that in mind, I could think of no better candidate than the Forked Tongue Hatchet. It just checks all the boxes. A shittier version of a previous weapon skill that already existed and can't be changed, dagger adjacent range yet weighs 4 pounds, 2% drop rate from enemies with a shitty gimmick and an 8-year-old animation rig, gets outperformed by any axe with the same moveset with a blood affinity, and the slightly faster R1s allow just the right amount of people to rise up and defend it for just a niche enough reason. The Forked-Tongued Hatchet sounds like the title of a shitty Lemony Snicket novel, and its will to exist in this game is the most unfortunate event of all time. Number 101, the Stone-Sheathed Sword. If the game itself designing the sword in a way that makes it as clear as a fucking mirror to the player that it's meant to be replaced doesn't convince you that it's a meme weapon with meme damage, then I know exactly what demonstration you need. This is a damage comparison between this sword and the Weathered Straight Sword. Even with 80s in both stats, the Stone-Sheathed Sword still manages to drag just barely behind by 16 damage. Somehow, this weapon manages to be worse than even one of the base game's most remarkable outliers on the doo-doo feces scale, and that should be enough to prove to anyone that the high B strength scaling should pretty much be ignored 100% of the time. No, it won't be kinda useful on the right build, just stop it. It's shit. Let it be shit. It's made to be shit, and you should either take it to one of the altars or just leave it alone. Number 100, the Tooth Whip. Okay, so I made some claims about Painful Strike that I've recently returned to, and I'm starting to nurse an increasingly growing pit of doubt that the stamina debuff is even good for anything outside of PvP. In the one bit of footage I captured for the DLC skills video, the Bloodfiend suddenly going apeshit when the buff wore off, I considered to be pretty substantial evidence of at least something happening. But I fired up a cheat table and monitored the stamina changes in real time, and not a single value moved whatsoever. So to anyone who knows how to deep dive into this sort of thing, I'm calling for a fucking investigation here. Either this skill doesn't work as intended and hasn't since launch, or it has never worked outside of a PvP environment and for all intents and purposes for this video, doesn't do a goddamn thing. In either case, fuck it. Number 99, the Bloodfiend's Sacred Spear. I'm not angry about the Ash being such an obvious copy-paste job for a $40 DLC. I mean, I'm a little angry at that. But what irks me the most is the untapped potential for something that could have been pretty fun here. The Ash imitates the weapon's exclusively physical output, which helps for dealing raw damage, but I really just don't agree with how the physics of this works at all. The hit bullet is somehow fat enough to get caught on random rock pillars and wall protrusions you weren't even aiming at, which means we get to add another one to the can't use it on a flight of stairs pile, even if you're just rejecting the use of the skill altogether and turbo fingering your R1 in front of someone. There are just so many better weapons to do this. Are we getting tired of this fucking status yet? And if not, can we? We got claws, we got reapers, we got katanas of various sizes, we got half the flail and whip library, we got thrusting swords that look like old can openers from the 50s, daggers, hammers, spinal columns, a bouquet? When do we get to just cyberbully this status out of commission yet? Just start bullying people. Who cares? Even the game is calling you names for using this. You fucking dweeb. Nope, that joke doesn't work. Hang on, one second. All right there, see? You're a fucking dweeb. Number 98, the Repeating Crossbow. It's already a crossbow, so that's like 2 letter grades docked immediately. But something seemed to happen in the DLC where the creative team suddenly got very interested in realistically representing the amount of arrows being fired in one skill. Because repeating fire throws out 12 arrows at once and with the cost of 26 FP, holy shit. And each arrow fired suffers from 45% less status buildup and around 55 to 60% damage per bolt. Maybe this is a weird case of like double balance where if something gets 2 glaring drawbacks just because there were 2 different people looking at it, and the second person just gave it a 26 FP cost without knowing its damage was already torched. I mean, it's my best guess. You tell me what happened then. Tell me why we have Rain of Arrows and Radahn's Rain cost a single arrow, and now is the time we've suddenly decided that might ruin someone's immersion. Number 97, Nanaya's Torch. Nanaya's Torch is a strange case where as long as it accumulates a slight amount of madness buildup or hits a dragon in his balls a specific amount of times, at least 2 people out there are gonna try and make it work for thematic purposes. And before I start making fun of how trash it is on every account, I just want to clarify to everyone that I get that pain. I feel it, okay? Reading an item description that gives a weapon such a cool backstory and so many neat little layers of info, only to have the balancing team kick its shins and send it into the ground is a feeling I think every single one of us has had about something at least once by now in one of these games, okay? I get it. I want this torch to be cool too. It's fucking not. Your only option for talisman activation purposes will always be Midra's Frenzy Flame, and I'm sorry, but it looks like that's just all the game is okay with giving you. I don't know why. They probably don't even know why either, but that's the timeline we're living in. K. Number 96 and 95, the Wolf and Serpent Crest Shields. Alright, so let's shine a little light behind the curtain here so I can explain exactly what the criteria is before people start disagreeing. If it's on the weapon list, it will be discussed using weapon-centric arguments, i.e. how much damage it's capable of, how accessible said damage is to different build types, etc. The Wolf and Serpent Crest Shields are probably 2 of the greatest shields in the game. Incredibly high guard boost, great individual elemental reductions for a medium shield, 100% physical reduction, it's all there. It's more than you could ever ask for. With strength scaling that never goes above a C, is rim jobbing the boundary into trash tier at the speed of a particle accelerator. The one single bit of comeuppance that comes with using a shield as a weapon is your build being considerably lighter than most other sword and board alternatives. And even then, all that needs to happen is for you to just run into a specific enemy with a specific type of damage and you're just fucked. Number 94, the Spirit Glaive. I have opinions about Ghost Flame, death sorceries, and whatnot, and although that may be only an opinion of a stranger on YouTube, I can tell by the feedback I've gotten over the years that it's one of my more agreeable ones. But Ghost Flame spells have now become so synonymous with underperformance that is beginning to affect the weapons they're tied to. Spirit Glaive, not unlike most death sorceries, suffers from being a slightly more inconvenient option than most of what it's competing against, including the unique skill. The weapon itself is improved mostly with dex, but the Rancor bullets from the unique skill only scale with intelligence and deal frostbite, so have fun figuring that shit out. This creates a very gluttonous weapon that demands to be built around, despite cold affinity scythes and halberds usually giving you much more to work with. Number 93, the Main-gauche. French for, my gosh, I just got parried. That's a lie. That's not even, it means a left hand. Apparently the German copy of the game literally just calls it the left-handed dagger, which I think is just as funny. It's got the good parrying animation that has a few more frames on it than the standard one, but how well this weapon fares in actual fights is going to come down to what you're dual wielding it with. since the name of the left-hand dagger immediately implies there should be something else in your right hand that's actually doing the damage. Hitting criticals with this weapon alone is really not that great, and if that's the case, then, well, I guess it really doesn't matter what you parry with as long as the main hand weapon actually shows up to work. So this could just as easily be a buckler or a shield with a golden parry or Carian retaliation. It's good at what it does, but unfortunately very easily replaceable. Number 92, Messmer Soldier's Shield. As a shield, it makes for one of the sturdiest and most wonderful traveling companions any warrior could have. As a weapon, it achieves all the same as slapping someone with an IKEA office clock. 80 base damage, a strength scaling of only 72, and it actually does marginally less overall damage than the Wolf and Serpent shields, but weighs 1 pound less. The heavy affinity takes the scaling up to 101, just in case anyone was curious, but that's going to be the same for most infusible medium shields. It's pretty much impossible to make a decent build out of any of these, but I'm putting them on here as a general courtesy, so do with that what you will. Number 91, the Bonny Butchering Knife. No, this one's Bonny's. Not that other one. It has his name on it, see? That's how you know. God, I need to stop and take a break after this one, because I need my whole being to just hate this piece of shit. You could have made Hone Blade into its own weapon. It wouldn't have been good, but you could have done it. You could have given it something more unique or put in an entirely different weapon altogether. You could have changed anything about the weapon to make it somewhat differentiable from its base game twin. Sure, you could have done all that. And you did. You actually did. You fucked around with the one thing that didn't even need to be changed, which was his scaling. So I can't even power stance the 2 butchering knives without investing into 2 different stats. Man, this whole weapon could just go fuck itself. Number 90, the Greatsword of Radahn Light. So this weapon is still the crackiest of asses, but they made one small change to it that I actually really liked. The holy beams were given less base damage in exchange for scaling directly with weapon level instead of only scaling with 1 stat. The weapon itself it's fine. It's hard to tell whether or not you're min-maxing correctly when you're slapping fuckers with the bumper of an Impala and doing 4-digit damage, but its major death sentence is being offered as the only other choice alongside the Lord variant. And I've already went over why I'd never choose the Helldiver's orbital laser in like 20 other videos, so I'm not doing it in this one. I just think they squandered a lot of opportunities here. Can't summon shadow clones of myself, can't have one weapon with a stance ability instead of 2 separate weapons altogether. Actually, that's a really good question. Why wasn't that the case? This is the only remembrance in the game that offers you 3 items, and splitting one weapon into 2 just makes everyone think you copy-pasted shit, so what even was the purpose of making the weapons like this? Forcing people into duping Micodon's remembrance more often? I saw someone call him that in the comment. I don't know. I personally think Ridiculous sounds way funnier and way more representative of the actual boss, but to each their own. Number 89, Devonia's Hammer. Just a whole lot of missed opportunities with this one. First off, the weapon skill has a direct tie to weapon level and not any single stat, so investing in strength only is probably the best way to go. It's actually tied with the Fire Knight's Greatsword with 5th highest physical AR of any weapon in the DLC, plus the 44 extra holy on the side, so flapjacking someone with a shitload of R1s remains a perfectly viable strategy, so long as you can actually see the fucking boss in front of you while you do it, but landing a fully charged vortex right into someone's fat, comically unsuspecting ass isn't even exclusive to this weapon. You've got a greatsword that's been rotting in your inventory for 2 years that's way lighter and has way better scaling than this rusted truck engine. Maybe start using that instead. Even the size of the vortex hitbox is exactly the same, like you couldn't have upscaled it even a little bit. Number 88 and 87, Tolier's Hidden Needle and Velvet Sword. Would be wonderful if these 2 items existed in a timeline where enemies in the DLC actually gave a shit about avoiding sleep, but I think the tipping point for me here is the distinct lack of arcane scaling on a status ailment that obviously would have benefited from it. Bleed and Poison have had this shit perfectly figured out for over 2 years, and sleep just never really caught up. The only sleep item I can really think of that actually scales with arcane are the pots, and that's just because I recently did a video on them. The Eternal Sleep Pot ends up being one of the greatest pots in the game solely because of its arcane scaling. But without that, Eternal Sleep just becomes a variant of sleep that's harder to inflict on everything, because the only weapons that have it come with less innate buildup. Take that fucking intelligence scaling off these 2 weapons and give it to the Meteoric Greatsword, or the Frozen Needle, or some other weapon that actually needs it. Number 86, the Spiraltree Seal. At 80 faith, this seal has a total sorcery scaling of 305, which is, wow. Yeah, that is shit, is what that is. I don't even have a joke for that. That's just plain shit. Spiral incantations get a 20% power bonus, which is pretty massive for a seal effect, but it would help out a little if the game was actually clear in delineating what is and isn't a spiral incantation. Both the divine spells commonly get thrown in there with the spirals despite the seal not boosting them, but Watchful Spirit also doesn't get the bonus, leaving the only 3 spells to actually benefit from it being the 2 Golden Arc spells and Spira, and I'm really not confident in a seal that thinks boosting 3 spells that never get used outside the DLC needs to be counterbalanced with scaling this impressively bad. Number 85, the Spirit Sword. And just in case anyone's keeping score on this, 9 weapons in total have been covered so far that either gets its model or weapon skill from the base game or is repeated somewhere else in the DLC. But the Spirit Sword at least knows what to copy, even if it's just a rinse and repeat weapon ash found on standard curved swords with a couple extra bullets attached to it. Even if it comes with a dagger-sized hitbox, at least the person in charge of making the weapon scalings actually showed up for work that day. 72s in both dexterity and intelligence, neither of which is great, but making a dex intelligence build in this game is already as close as you're ever going to get to the pie-in-the-sky fantasy of Miyazaki sending you suggestive photos to your Discord. So even if you have to invest in 2 separate stats to make this weapon work, just be thankful these were what you landed on. Number 84, the Smithscript Dagger. I think throwing blades as a weapon class could have been a really good idea. Having a ranged attack tied to your R1 and R2 at the expense of big damage can be pretty fun, but there's only one in the entire game, and referring to what it has access to as a library of weapon ashes feels very dishonest when it's actually just 2 mid skills with a premise that boils down to throw shit harder. Applying status with certain affinities feels much safer at range, which is doubly true after the recent range buff, and you can still slap other ashes on this like TPFB for poison or Bloodhound Step if you just feel like being a massive penis. Even with the scaling, the damage by itself is pretty trash, but it's also incredibly flexible with different talisman lineups. It makes a great offhand weapon to keep poise from regenerating, dealing only pierce damage carves out a nice enough space for poking dragons, and it's honestly not good at that or really anything else in the game you'd consider productive. But with everything that can be built around it, I think people dismiss this one way too quickly. Number 83, the Madding Hand. Forged of an unyielding black impulse towards revenge fostering— God fucking damn it, whoever writes these needs to get hired to do car commercials. Relying not on trickery to fulfill its violent purpose, the Acura TLX demands only well-honed skill to sow blossoms of red upon the highway. Raises attack power when in the vicinity of other Acuras. Unfortunately, the madness bonus can't be triggered via Inescapable Frenzy due to its animation making the character invincible, which is just fucking peachy because that's all I've been doing in this footage, so awesome. Thankfully, the buildup accumulated by using Midra's Frenzy Flame still gives you a pretty reliable way to proc the effect on yourself, and the bonus stacks with the Aged One's Exaltation, giving you a 29% total boost in damage, which is something you'll happen to desperately need if you're hopeless enough to try and make a build around this weapon and not just switching to the Star Fist like everyone else. Number 82, the Golem Fist. It's got some pretty nasty shortcomings that I can't ignore. The overall AR is not head-turning on any account, and saying the heavy attacks have a ranged punch reeks from the same tinge of dishonesty as a car salesman saying this price is only good for today or some shit. But on status builds, hitting something up close with a 2-handed heavy means the status gets applied 4 times in one attack. Well, it's technically only 300% status buildup since one of the attack IDs gets sliced in half, but with 82 base build up on a good arcane build, that's still pretty stupid. Like, you should still take that. This also makes it a pretty nifty stance break weapon if you can afford to tank a good hit with a high poise armor set. So that's quite a long list of recommendations you'd theoretically need to account for to make this weapon worth an atomized shit, but I think too many people get caught up by the incredibly short range on the heavies and just decide it's a bad weapon altogether. Which isn't completely unsubstantiated. I'm just saying there are diamonds in the cow shit is all. Mostly cow shit. Number 81, the Golden Lion Shield. Taking Radahn's kneecap and turning it into a shield I think is the funniest way FromSoft has ever repurposed an asset. I don't even care that it's a copy-paste job. If they were this creative in repurposing everything, I honestly think that would just make the game better. Do you know how awesome it would be to have a staff with one of those Burger King looking ass glintstone crowns at the top? 97 base damage with the speed of a medium shield is still nowhere near what I would call recommendable, and the unique skill only seems to be suitable for crowd control and stance breaking. It does get boosted by Freya's Greatsword though, so that's pretty cool. And it's only 5.5 pounds, which is surprisingly light for the guard boost it offers. But even with that in mind, it's way better suited to be in your offhand actually blocking shit like it's meant to be used instead of trying to force it into a position it doesn't want to be in. Number 80, the Spread Crossbow. The very fundamentals of how this crossbow operates, I just don't agree with. I'm very obviously launching 10, count them, 10 crossbow bolts in one fell swoop, one single button press, but as you can clearly see by these parameters here, it only fires multiple groups of the same 3 bullets, and each group is capable of hitting the same enemy one time, despite needing 10 bolts to fully fire. So that whole thing about suddenly deciding to be interested in fixing your immersion by having multi-hit shots spend multiple arrows, yeah, well I just found a 10 pellet scattergun that only counts up to 3 hits on the same target. Explain that shit, Bill Nye. Number 79, the Smithscript Spear. I really thought I was gonna like this one. I saw the heavy attack animation and just immediately thought, well, fuck Spectral Lance then, I'm just gonna use this. Yeah, I know, I had a little laugh at myself too when I actually tried to use it. It's honestly one of the cooler attack animations, even of the Smithscript variety, but one thing the game fails to tell you is its horrible damage drop-off once it travels past a certain effective range. This kind of penalty is expected on throwing weapons. It would honestly be more concerning if you got its full damage no matter what, but I really would prefer that drop-off to be a slow and gradual one, and not the near vertical roller coaster plunge that takes away like 80% of its damage if I'm 2 inches out of range. Oh, and the scaling sucks, like really bad. Number 78, the Fire Knight's Short Sword. Yep, it's a dagger, alright. Loses the damage race to Earthsteel Dagger in most situations, and I'd much rather have the death debuff utility that comes with the Black Knife, but the Keen and Occult affinities are pretty nice, so I guess you could grease this bitch up with something and just allow the visual effects to let you pretend you're using a slightly better dagger. The innate fire damage can be convenient too, and there's probably a niche out there for the magic affinity since you're handing out 3 types of damage at once, but in most normal situations, you're probably not going to be racing to pick this one up. Number 77, the Shield of Night. You need a bit of practice, like you really need a lot of practice, and you still can't really use the counter attack against half the bigger bosses in the DLC, or half the normal enemies without Scholar's Shield, but if you pray hard enough, if you delude yourself to such an extent that dusty old 49 starts looking like a 94 if you cross your eyes intensely enough, then maybe you can give your balls a hard enough tug to stand in front of a fucking grave bird and pull off a successful counter attack once in your goddamn life. But that's just about the tip of the hill with this one. The unique skill is a skill first and foremost, meaning it obviously gets boosted by Shard of Alexander, but the Curved Sword Talisman doesn't seem interested, so there goes half the guard counter potential, I guess. You can try to reflect magic projectiles with it, but I think most people will just be disappointed with its range. No matter what you decide to block with it, you're going to be constantly fighting with a pretty glaring shortcoming. Number 76, the Beast Claw. The standard Beast Claw not only gets noticeably left behind by a mathematically superior counterpart, but has to endure the additional negatives that come with the Beast Claw weapon type. A lot of you probably got this and ran through the basic moveset a couple times and thought, wow, that covers a lot of distance. I bet this is great for spacing out attacks and chasing down enemies that move around a lot, and because you were just fucking around in a church somewhere, not actually fighting anything, one of the worst drawbacks of using this weapon wasn't immediately obvious, which is its horribly large use of stamina. Most of the status motion values also only clock in at 50% of a normal R1 since a lot of its animations have multiple attacks, ultimately meaning grabbing the blood affinity might not help as much as you want it to. But hey, it only weighs 3 pounds, and that leaves you plenty of room to break out that ultra heavy armor set that you will need if you ever want to actually land enough attacks to proc something. Number 75, the Chilling Perfume Bottle. I'm starting to feel like this entire weapon class is suffering from the rickety shield conundrum where none of them are really that great by themselves, but having only elemental damage on a main hand weapon with no FP cost and weighing a single pound it's never going to be awful. I mean, even if the scaling tries its best to say otherwise, the base damage is already slightly lower than the 2 main perfume bottles due to it being a status weapon, but double C's on a plus 25 just needs to get the hell out of my face right now. You've either got better perfume bottles or better frostbite weapons, or most likely both. Number 74, the Swift Spear. This just feels extremely weird. The light attacks are obviously meant for status buildup on certain affinities or maybe with greases, but the delays between its light attacks are a full 20 frames longer than the standard spear moveset. 1/3 of a second of downtime between each light attack, and with no changes to the speed of the heavy attack, which feels slower than ever on a spear that has the nerve, the goddamn testes, to claim a gimmick and speed that it doesn't even own or use properly. I've seen swifter movements from a night shift janitor, and I'm afraid to make too much fun of it because this is the first moveset I've seen on a spear from these games that I'm actually half satisfied with visually. Just, the moveset is really cool, I promise. Just please take the awkward fucking delays out. They shouldn't be there. Please, just do it. Number 73, the Lamenting Visage. Would anyone care to explain to me how 173 strength scaling somehow got placed on a torch? This looks like a styrofoam Halloween decoration that was left in the garage of a family who hasn't celebrated it in 7 years, so why is it capable of more damage than half the straight swords? I mean, it's still horrible. It's stuck with the shitty 15-second unseen form clone you can't get rid of, and it doesn't accept greases or weapon buffs since it's a torch, but if I'm walking out of one of the forge areas with enough red gems jingling around in my pocket to open up a fucking jewelry boutique and the only thing I used to do it was a yapping head, I'm not just gonna act like it didn't happen. Of course I'm gonna point out how stupid and awesome it is. Number 72, the Carian Sorcery Sword. Honestly, A for effort. High A. Very high A. I'm glad we can finally get our hands on a weapon catalyst hybrid, and I hope it doesn't come across as too ungrateful when I say I would have preferred literally anything else that wasn't this. The total intelligence scaling is just a hair above 200, which is wonderful. That's kind of on par with what I would expect from a weapon catalyst, but this is not sorcery scaling, this is intelligence scaling. Very different. Additionally, any sorcery that does physical damage like Rock Sling or Blades of Stone erroneously scale from the weapon's strength and dexterity, and magma sorceries that normally scale from faith suffer from the same bug, and since there's no faith scaling on the weapon, there's no adjustment to the damage, like, at all. And I just want to say, if even the team themselves are this confused on how to make this, how the fuck are we supposed to feel using it? Can we at least know the exact sorcery scaling? Like, can we just get a number, please? Who gives a shit? Melee, magic, all in one package. Carian Slicer and Impaling Thrust on the same sword. What more could you ask for? Can I ask for it to fucking work properly? Number 71, Ansbach's Longbow. I've been trained to treat all FromSoft descriptions with a tinge of doubt, so when I read this could be wielded like a light bow, I immediately went in to actually test it, and yes, I could. It has access to dodging attacks in the same manner as a light bow. But this was only a marginal positive in a whole polluted river of issues that just makes this bow way less convenient than even other DLC bows. Maybe don't take 8 fucking arrows out of my inventory if only 2 are allowed to hit the same enemy on any given fan shot. This has become one of the worst bows for status buildup, losing out to the bone bow and even base game options like the pulley crossbow. Shit, I could even see the repeating crossbow doing better if your target has no will to live, and maybe give the scaling at least a little more help if your spoiled ass needs 43 dex to even pick it up. No, maybe I don't want to move on. Maybe this bow pisses me off a little. Number 70, the Frenzy Flame Perfume Bottle. Having the messy salad of stat scaling that it does helps it out in New Game Plus runs where you start hitting hard caps and decide to invest in something else. And if looked at in that regard, this is probably the bottle with the highest performance overall. Getting there, on the other hand, requires patience or a level of hyperfixation that I don't even think I'm capable of. I'm sure it's got decent applications in PvP. It's a fucking madness weapon, so of course it does. But you stand to gain nothing of value by sticking it out all the way until the Abyssal Woods instead of just taking the Fire Spark bottle. The only good one. The only serviceable one, perhaps. And since when did anything Frenzy Flame start asking for an intelligence requirement? Like, what the fuck? Number 69, the Smithscript Axe. I kept running into the same problem with this weapon that I did with the spear, which is its throwing attacks and the downright inexcusably small gap between full damage and light tropical breeze that tends to come with them. The point of throwing the goddamn weapon to begin with is that I'm out of melee range. If I have to get so close to soldiers they start looking at me like I'm taking their measurements for a fucking suit, why wouldn't I just hit them with the axe instead of throwing it? And what feels even more out of place is that only the axe and the spear seem to suffer from this sort of penalty. The Greathammer can spank anyone into a nice coma so long as it's properly charged, and the dagger's damage sucks so much the fall off doesn't matter anyways. Also, incredibly short range even for an axe. Number 68, Moonrathil's Night Sword. When Sony eventually buys FromSoft and starts poisoning everything with battle passes and shitty remasters none of us need, the only good thing they could possibly do is trademark the name Moonrathil and then dump it in a trash bin somewhere and never use it again. again. I'm sick of this bitch. I hate her weapon. I hate how hard she hits for no reason. I hate that the weapon skill doesn't seem to put the pain in as much as regular great spears with glint blade phalanx, and I hate that this isn't even the first time we're looking at an obvious copy-paste of a pre-existing weapon with the exact same stats, damage, scaling, and guard boost. Even the FP cost is the same as Troll's Roar, just like split up. If you randomly picked out these two weapons from the DLC and tried to sell me on it, I would have assumed Sony bought this company years ago. Nah, that's too mean. I'm walking that one back. That's too mean. I mean, stop this shit. This is very bad, but like that was too much. I didn't mean that. Number 67, the Horned Warrior's Sword. Nah, I'm really just not a fan. I think almost every time I've went to use the skill on it and immediately go for a dodge, my character suddenly just needs a breather and ends up taking a club to the face. And that can only happen so many times until I finally make the connection that this hasn't really been a problem with any other weapon I try to use. Like, holy shit, am I unclogging Thamur's toilet? What single action could possibly be this demanding of so much stamina from one person? And the skill isn't even good. I mean, it does its job, it's good damage, I've busted a few decently large kneecaps with it, but nothing that'll ever justify the expense of like 80-something stamina. The horns do holy damage, which only scale off of faith, despite it being one of the weapon's weaker scalings, and I just never get tired of seeing that shit. I don't get tired of that at all. Number 66, the Deadly Poison Perfume Bottle. You know what? I don't have a clue. I don't have the faintest idea where this bottle should go, and judging by the discourse I see on it, I'm very confident in saying that's a pretty fucking crowded boat to be on. The unique skill is far from anything special. I mean, finding ways to activate talismans is certainly useful since we're talking about 20% more damage, but if that's all it does, it's probably not something you need to mention in the instruction manual. Like, most of us probably already know that. But using it near enemies can apply heavy poison on them too, not only giving you the buff from the talisman, but also leaving enemies susceptible to things like Poison Moth Flight and TPFB. The damage is considerably less than the other options due to its status application. I can't think of a single reason it needed to be a somber weapon, yet other status bottles like Chilling and Frenzy Flame just aren't, and all other bottles except this one come with the benefit of pure elemental damage on a 1-pound weapon, so the physical damage here just feels like a step backwards. It has so many weird little bullet points tugging it in both directions when I think the only question that really matters here is why? What's the fucking point in this weapon? Because I don't see one. Number 65, Freya's Greatsword. I try not to take a weapon's location that much into consideration. I think it's something worth looking at every now and then, but not to the extent that I probably talk about. It's on the list of criteria somewhere, sure, but it's far from the heaviest influence on what anyone should think to be a good weapon. Well, I guess that little preamble kind of spoils what I'm about to say next, but whatever. Look, I'm sorry, if you give this to me after the penultimate boss fight in what's largely considered post-game content, I'm gonna look at the Solitude Greatsword I got at the very beginning and then back at this and just go, no. The only affinity I can see being worth a second glance is the heavy infusion with 156 strength scaling, which is pretty comfortably above normal A-grade scaling. The niche here is red main skills. Putting a red main skill on this CGS versus a common colossal sword gives you noticeably better results, so if you're so attached to Flame of the Red Mains and Lion's Claw that studies are currently being conducted on how to medically separate you from it without killing you, then here you go, you found your sword. Number 64, the Bloodfiend's Fork. I don't want what I say here to confuse anyone into thinking the damage on this is anywhere near the federal jurisdiction of good, but having Barbaric Roar on a bleed weapon actually doesn't fare too badly in common fights. Maybe since it's a spear, most people just don't think about it, and that might have something to do with Barbaric Roar on a spear giving you one of the stupidest looking attack animations in the game, but that's still 3 point-blank hits from a high bleed weapon that hands out 240% total status with a charged attack. It's an incredibly uncommon way to build up status, and people will absolutely give you weird looks if you try to recommend doing it under any normal circumstances, but Barbaric Roar on a weapon like this honestly doesn't feel too out of place. Just make sure you go for the blood infusion because there's very little point in even looking at anything else about it. Number 63 and 62, the Lightning and Fire Spark Perfume Bottles. Mechanically speaking, perfume bottles are bags of old shit. They trade decent AoE for animation speed, stagger potential, reliable damage, and a list of other things that can't be found on even the plainest weapons as a baseline, but you've also got a 1-pound weapon that's capable of pure elemental damage without being split, meaning it only receives that much more of a bonus from the Scorpion Talismans, Crystal Tears, spells like Terra Magica. I don't know why I'm trying to sell people on these. Like, don't use them, please. I'm just saying if you had to be stuck with one for whatever reason, I would advise choosing between these two. Preferably the Fire Spark bottle because all its scaling is actually in one place. But any longer than a couple minutes trying to make any of these work, and that challenge run idea very suddenly stops sounding fun. So I sooner recommend you stop e-torturing yourself and just grab grab a colossal sword like everyone else. Number 61, the Barbed Staff-Spear. I wouldn't want to call this misleading or anything, but just be warned that A in face scaling at plus 10 is one of the lowest A's mathematically possible. The dex scaling is only slightly higher than strength, but you're better off just not investing in either. The golden arcs fired from its unique skill can also inflict bleed in the same way the actual spear can, but if I'm starting to list out positives I'm not even 100% sure are actually there by design, it might be time for me to admit this spear just isn't that great. Having holy damage and bleed on the same weapon probably satisfies some weird niche out there that I haven't thought about, but if you're in need of a coat rack that badly, I'm sure you can find a Kohl's nearby if you actually left your fucking apartment every once in a while. Number 60, the Black Steel Greatshield. Even though detached passenger doors can be repurposed as potential weapons, saying you should stick to an actual sword probably isn't advice a YouTuber needs to tell you. Most people know not to use shields as weapons, unless specifically designated otherwise, but great shields of the heavier variety become a tougher case to argue, because the damage output is usually pretty accurate to getting stapled to the floor by a vintage cabinet. 119 physical damage is barely enough to scrape past worse one-handed weapons, but the benefit that comes with downsizing your build by using a shield as a weapon isn't really insignificant. Thing is, if that's the strategy you're heading toward, you've got two perfectly viable letter openers willing and able to lend themselves to the cause. Number 59, the Bone Bow. I'm not here to talk about the bow. I don't think anyone who's ever made a ranking or a tier list on weapons has ever actually wanted to talk about the bow, because the bow itself sucks. Rancor Shot, on the other hand, might be a contender for dethroning even Rain of Arrows as that's just not correct. Nothing's touching that shit. Rancor Shot tacks on an additional bit of frostbite buildup on top of whatever your arrows are doing, allowing you to inflict multiple status ailments at once, or just a shitload of frostbite, which is probably what you should be doing. That's probably its purpose. It inflicts 90% of a normal arrow shot compared to the Barrage's 80, in addition to 75% of the normal status buildup, and it's still not really that good. Status application tools have come a long way, so if this wants to compete with the likes of hefty rot pots and bleed-infused claws, I'm gonna need to see some fucking elbow grease. Number 58, Igon's Great Bow. I feel like it's been so long since I've even seen a bow with scaling that's even marginally good, so when I saw 72 strength scaling on this, I almost thought I modded it by accident. Well, cool. A bow that might actually be okay for strength building. And unless you've got the right ammo and you're pointing it at the right target, the Golem Great Bow still ends up winning most of the time, but baby steps are steps nonetheless. If you've got the bow and the harpoons and Igon's Drake Hunt equipped for the Ash, and you just so happen to be aiming it at the head of a dragon, then dare I say you may actually be able to break skin every so often. When it comes to damage, any build that anchors itself around a bow is just not going to be good, and they shouldn't be. Bows, as they always have been, are supplementary weapons used to expand on an already established build. Perhaps in a different timeline, Simon's bowblade got cut from Bloodborne and eventually fell far enough down the pipeline to make it into this DLC, but it's not this one. Bows are supplementary, and even though Igon's bow might be a tiny step above the others, it's still not really an exception. Number 57, the Sword of Darkness. Exact same scaling, exact same base damage, both their special effects result in the exact same holy damage boost, and measuring the amount of effort it takes to obtain one versus the other honestly just sounds like an overcomplicated pseudo discussion, so deciding which one of these is better will ultimately come down to their unique skill and how the subsequent buff is applied. The Darkness skill, unlike its light counterpart, applies a damage reduction to enemies it hits instead of just giving you a damage bonus outright, so I think it's pretty fair to say light wins out in the buff department just due to its convenience. The light skill can hit up to 4 times on the same target, resulting in a base of 244 holy damage versus Darkness's 310. But this ignores one critical detail, which is that the damage buff from light is activated immediately as the animation starts, meaning the consecutive hits will get boosted by the buff as well. During the post-game, and especially in New Game Plus cycles, this gives the Sword of Light a pretty tremendous lead over Darkness. Visual preference aside, the choice in efficiency here is pretty obvious. Number 56, Raboth's Cannon. No idea what the fuck a Spell Machinist is, but it kinda sucks that such a cool name for a faction gets only one canonical mention from anything in the whole DLC. Like, what would a Spell Machinist weapon even look like? A magic staff with a steam pump? Well, when you give me this little to work with, that's where my imagination goes. It'll only outperform the Jar Cannon if you take the time to apply a buff or two thanks to its split damage, and the extra tracking when locked on is a nice benefit on paper, but I never really find it helping all that much, especially when the reload times on these are so uncomfortably drawn out that using them in a sniper's position alongside 9 different buffs is really the only way to guarantee some kind of value, and that usually involves a non-aggroed, unmoving target. If something is moving fast enough for me to need the extra tracking, it's probably on its way to kick my ass right now. Number 55, Pole Blade of the Bud. I think you can say this one is underrated and still think it's pointless. I don't think those two positions have to be mutually exclusive. The alternate Halberd moveset helps with applying status, but doesn't completely make up for its lower than average build-up. The damage is pretty nice, the weapon skill always seems to hit something, and feels really great to control when you're not locked onto anything. Really, the only thing it's missing is proper arcane scaling, which isn't completely a fault of the weapon itself, rather the oppressive system it never consented to living under. And that'll probably never get fixed because that would also mean rebalancing all the rot incantations, pots, greases, and scarlet rot infused non-stick kitchenware. Number 54, the Fire Knight Seal. The biggest leap in efficiency is seen between 60 and 80 faith, which is something I think you wouldn't expect to see on a seal that only needs 23 faith to even be picked up. The Erdtree Seal having that feature makes some sort of sense because of its higher faith requirement, but you do need to devote yourself pretty goddamn hard just to be within body odor range of some of the Fire Knight incantations, so I guess it works out anyways. A 15% boost to the concert stadium-sized damage of Messmer's Orb is still pretty significant to just pass up, so you could always hold it alongside a better seal to receive the bonus instead. Number 53, the Sword of Light. It just works better. The direct buff to your holy damage is way more convenient than tying a debuff to enemies that are hit with the skill, but on either sword, the faith scaling is just not really good enough for me to recommend over something like the Death Knight weapons or Sunflower Blossom. Honestly, in that regard, it makes for a perfect supplementary weapon thanks to its buffing power alone, especially since the buff remains even while swapping the weapon to something else. But having the faith scaling that it does kills any forward momentum this sword would have had as an actual weapon outside of just being another L2 stick. Number 52, the Smithscript Greathammer. Just fun as shit is what this one is. You can find so many little proficiencies with this hammer just by messing around with the affinities because it always retains a sliver of scaling in faith and intelligence. You can go for the poison or bleed affinities if you consider yourself a Badied build, but Flameart and Sacred remain great options for fans of the dick. The damage drop-off also does affect the hammer throws just like it would any other Smithscript item, but the throw covers so much distance that you're very likely to just not ever go outside its effective range to begin with. It also incentivizes throws at close range since the charging animation has a couple spins on it that also count as their own hits. Number 51, Rellana's Twin Blades. Not Twin Blade. Twin Blades. There's a difference. This is really just a quality affinity weapon with a flashy, colorful, unique skill. Leveling intelligence will only increase magic damage on the main hand sword, and leveling faith will only increase the fire damage on the other sword, leaving neither stat in a particularly comfortable position. The only real course forward you have here is investing in strength and dex and just not using the unique skill attached to it, or investing in either intelligence or faith while only using one half of the attached skill. Both options are very uncomfortable and unwieldy to build around. Sword of Night and Flame always suffered from the same problem, albeit to a lesser extent, and I think that's just because weapons capable of so many different damage types end up being spread way too thin in their scalings. On New Game Plus cycles, this easily becomes one of the greatest, most well-rounded weapons, but only because all your stats are so crammed that you could kill someone with a cream cheese donut if you wanted to. Number 50, the Greatsword of Radahn, Lord. Well, it's not bad. I constantly had trouble testing the full damage on the skill combo because shit would just die before I could even finish it, so it's absolutely not a bad weapon, mechanically speaking. But specifically regarding lost potential, this might be the single weapon that suffers the most. I feel like there's a certain pressure that comes with developing weapons like these because when you give their ownership to a literal god, it comes with the expectation that you're going to feel like a god when using them. And I don't feel like a god, Miyazaki. Mercilessly spanking small enemies not a single person has ever had trouble with, and then getting MMA kicked out of the same skill combo by a horned warrior off screen doesn't make me feel like a god at all. It makes me feel like a goddamn moron. Number 49, the Maternal Staff. The split scaling just barely drags behind Prince of Death with 55 base scaling in both intelligence and arcane compared to the 58 seen on the Prince of Death staff. Ultimately meaning this is really just another New Game Plus staff with a ceiling that can only be reached on specifically dedicated builds. But the sorceries it can boost tend to be much more useful and hit way harder than anything offered by the Death subtype, giving the staff a pretty tremendous advantage. With 80s in both stats, it also has scaling very similar to Lusat's staff, only without the extra FP usage. As far as its power in first run playthroughs, it takes 50 in both stats just to climb up to 276, which is pretty terrible, and with that arcane level alone, it'll still lose to the Albinoric staff. It is pretty funny though that the arcane scaling contributes to bleed buildup on Thorn sorceries. It absolutely doesn't. That sure was a funny joke that I just told, huh? Number 48, the Serpent Flail. It sucks so bad that I have to put this as low as I am, because this might be the only flail I'll ever use in the whole game. In addition to being the only flail with a unique skill that's actually worth a shit, the high faith scaling on +10 matches perfectly with its fire buff that also purely scales with faith. The unique skill easily hard carries the entire flail multiple spaces above other flails, and pure faith builds can very comfortably power stance it with a flame art flail of their choosing. Most of where this weapon comes up short can really just be said about the state of flails in general. Charging a heavy still takes way too damn long, and oil pots don't really synergize with it that well, since the fire damage on the weapon itself usually hits an enemy and gets the oil bonus before the actual explosion from the buff ever has a chance to. Number 47, Quayline's Greatsword. This thing looks like a fence post fucked in ampersand, and I don't know how to prove that's a compliment, but that's what it is. I was expecting the flame art affinity to be nuts, but the A scaling for arcane on the occult affinity was a pleasant surprise. Also, I should probably make a little footnote here that even though this weapon's description doesn't really say anything about it, the Messmer themed lineup of weapons have this little quirk that like doubles the potency of Messmer fire grease versus using it on any random Joe Schmo shish kebab, and seeing how the sword already sort of leans in the direction of a grease themed build with its 153 arcane scaling on its occult affinity, keeping your pockets lined with various status and Messmer fire greases could result in a pretty effective build. Number 46, the Obsidian Lamina. Scythes have always passed under the radar, and they're mostly seen as a hard backstep from their previous iteration from Dark Souls 3. The moveset was faster, and they were just all around better weapons. The Obsidian Lamina doesn't really do anything to challenge that, but it does manage to be pretty damn good for a scythe. It's the only other scythe with the alternate heavy attack animation that strikes multiple times, making it ideal for status buildup, and the unique skill used to fart through stamina like my conservative uncle's Ford Bronco, but that's mostly been fixed. 108 dexterity scaling is only enough to bring it up to a high B, serviceable and way more than enough to save it from any large pitfalls in the damage department, but the skill does feel kinda slow at times, and it's really easy to overcommit to the full combo when you probably shouldn't. Not counting the unique skill, the Bloody Healist seems to take the lead pretty handily. Number 45, Death Knight's Twin Axes. The lightning scales with faith, making it one of the only weapons in the entire pool to have lightning damage that isn't impacted by dexterity. So if you already have a nice Dragon Cult Incantation build carved out for yourself, and you like firmly placing heavy ass shit on the top of someone's head, which I would wager is a lot of us, then have fun with one of the only weapons in the whole game that can scratch both itches at once. Strength should still be a priority since the total scaling is just a hair higher than faith, but I'd still consider ignoring them if you're gunning specifically for a Death Knight build when the long half axe is a hop and a skip away. Outside of its easy requirements and highly spammable unique skill, most of the weapon's potential gets suffocated by one of the worst two-handed movesets animation in FromSoft's computer files. Number 44, the Great Katana. It's a katana, but it's great, and it comes with one of the most unenthrallingly basic weapon skills that begs to be removed immediately upon use. But the weapon itself is actually not bad at all. The mix of thrusting and slashing attacks in its basic moveset helps it out against different types of enemies. The strength and dex requirements accurately reflect how it scales. 145 base damage is nice enough, and every single affinity scaling is happily dancing in the space of good enough, all alone and throwing its own party. Its beauty is shown through its modesty, and its unwillingness to impress anyone is more attractive than the most decorated spears and axes. And none of that matters because it still gets left behind by the only other two great katanas in the DLC. Number 43, the Sword of Night. I mentioned this previously in another video, but both Night-themed weapons, being the sword and claws, have magic damage that only scales with dexterity. This actually used to have an intelligence requirement before 1.12 and they got rid of it. Not tying a specific element to a specific stat, I think is a generally good approach. Maybe I want to be an intelligence user and also fling holy golden spaghettios at people, and I get the DLC likely intended for every build to have access to every type of damage, but this shit is just way too confusing. Promised Consort does holy damage while the swords themselves are magic and scale with intelligence. Gazing Finger scales with intelligence more than faith, but the unique skill benefits equally from both. The Fire Spark Bottle is a pure fire weapon that scales only off of dex, which is just funny as fuck. The Ancient Meteoric Sword and Flowerstone Gavel both have arcane scaling. Whoever made the Smithscript items just didn't give a shit, and every single sleep weapon in the game has an intelligence requirement with no arcane scaling. I'm not criticizing that there's something for everyone, I think that part's cool. A little bit of clarity would also be cool, is all I'm really saying. Number 42, the Black Steel Twin Blade. Further holy imbuement will increase the armament's power, huh? Alright, let's take a look at the Sacred Affinity. So, So I think that might be bullshit. Oh wait, no it's not. This bitch has 264 base holy damage. Never mind, shit's insane. As far as imbuement goes, other holy weapon buffs seem to further boost its holy damage, but only on the standard affinity, since you can't really buff an infused weapon. This results in the buff getting around twice its usual efficiency versus using it on other weapons, and twin blades already seem to be the way to go here, since flat damage buffs always work better on weapons capable of fast and frequent attacks. Wow, you know what? I'm impressed. I legitimately didn't think this would do shit, but as it turns out, the sacred affinity might not be the play for this one. Who needs 264 holy damage when you can just take the standard affinity, fire up the old Order's Blade, and start usurping some fucking thrones? Number 41, the Horned Warrior's Greatsword. It's lacking a few particular things I would have preferred on the weapon. A little more faith scaling probably would have been nice, especially since the unique skill has a bit of holy damage attached to it, but it's great for hitting fuckers through walls and around corners. The skill is a good eat shit I win button to whip out if you're being surrounded and just don't feel like playing the game for 2 seconds. And it turns out being sucker punched by a horny tornado is pretty unhealthy for the old kneecaps, measuring in at 57 total poise damage. The basic R1s are pretty weak, and the weapon can't be buffed or infused or any of that business, but the massive range and stopping power on the unique skill already feels like it's doing enough work anyways, so. Number 40, the Messmer Soldier's Axe. Most of the affinities here aren't really spectacular, but this could be one of those atypical situations where it might not even need an affinity at all. 62 strength and dex scaling out of the box is already all you need for a quality affinity weapon, and on good quality builds that emphasize strength and dex, it seems to outdamage almost every other standard axe in the game. Granted, going above and beyond in the axe bracket doesn't really require Olympian strength or anything, but hey, a W is a W. Number 39, the Gazing Finger. Man, there's too many fucking heads in this game. Like, an alarming amount of heads. Lamenting Visage, Sunflower Blossom, Family Head, Celebrant Skull, Ancestral Infant Head, Grafted Dragon, Falling Star Jaw gets like a half a point, I guess. Why are there so many heads? I can see the problem developing here that I did with R'Lana's twin blades and the like, which is that I really just feel like the weapon is trying to be too many things at once, and leveling yourself in a certain direction is going to result on you missing out on something no matter what. Depending on how you've built yourself, this can be the lightest colossal R1 bonker of all time with a useless unique skill, or a 15-pound catalyst that jizzes mountains of pure concentrated pissed off. Number 38, the Putrescence Cleaver. At 40 strength and arcane, it has the highest physical AR of any great axe, not even including the magic damage. The unique skill is good for poise breaking too, I guess. It's just, okay, I was kind of hamming up my annoyance at some of the item descriptions on the shields and the black steel twin blade and whatnot, and the twin blade description is good, that one's fine, but now I just feel like I'm being poked with a stick. Gains power from the wielder's arcane attribute is the kind of line you only write because there's someone asking you, why does this weapon need arcane to work? Like, usually there's at least some amount of exposition on why it works the way it does or needs a certain something, but on here it's just, fuck you, level arcane. Honestly, I would have respected more if it literally just said scales with arcane, like no immersion or flavor whatsoever, just, hey, Jizz Chief. You see this letter D right here by the word arcane? Can you guess what that means? And it's like not even the highest scaling on the fucking weapon either. So like, why the theatrics? What's the point? Number 37, the Smithscript Cirque. Damage is pretty crap. Effective range gargles piss, but throwing 2 projectiles at close range instead of 1 ends up being unusually strong. It got a range buff on 1.12.3, and the sweeping nerf to backhand blades from 1.14 affected just about everything except the throwing attacks on the Cirque. We've also finally bumped butts with our first S scaling on the whole list at 183 dex scaling with the Keen Affinity. The Smithscript is the only backhand blade with such a noticeable damage deficit specifically because they have a ranged attack, and the Keen Affinity closes that gap very comfortably, allowing it to compete with the Curse Blade and the standard backhand a bit more directly while still only weighing 2 pounds. Throwability is really the only edge that Smithscript weapons have over their competition, so you might as well stop caring about diaper chiefs on the internet that judge you for spamming attacks because that's kind of what it's there for. Number 36, the Star-Lined Sword. Why do all the mages get the cool shit they just flat out don't need? You know how many katanas holy users have? Bullshit, that's how many. Fucking Poison got a katana before a whole ass damage type. And due to its length, the basic attack chain really isn't even that good. No, we all know why you're using this katana if you pick it up. And it doesn't even scale that much with intelligence. Granted, scaling only with weapon level makes things way more convenient and results in the weapon being much easier to use as a whole, but considering this is a weapon with close ties to something like the demi-humans, I guess that's to be expected. God damn it, the fuck? The demi-humans have their own katana now. And even still, it's just the aquamarine dagger with a bigger dick. It's a katana with a 6-hit unique skill. You tell me how good you think it is. Number 35, the Poisoned Hand. It's got a 7.5% attack power bonus that can stack with all the other poison buffs in the game, including Mushroom Crown. So even if the AR per strike isn't that good, it's still worth it on a high arcane build just because every little boost is going to help you. It is deadly poison though, so detonation tools like Poison Moth Flight won't have as much juice behind it. But the buff works even if you don't meet the arcane requirements, which I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to. Arcane is pretty important if you actually want to proc the status, but as long as it's somewhere in your quick select while something gets poisoned, you will get the boost. Good. I don't want to wear this shit. Just think about the concept of this. How pissed does someone have to be to rip off someone's hands, hollow them out, and use them as weapons over their own hands? This is the kind of shit you learn about in forensics class, not a video game written by a dude who used to write stories about his pet turtles. Number 34, the Dueling Shield. The shield strike weapon dash is a bit awkward to get used to. The guard boost seems to get tanked even further than what's normal on most infusions, and you find both dueling shields in roughly the same place, leaving the varying limitations on the plain dueling shield feeling very confusing and mostly just unnecessary. Unless you've decided to sign up for the cult of counterattacks, I'd probably just put this away. And even then, you've still got the Carian shield that seems to do twice the work. I mean, it's a dueling shield. It's still at least good. Like, building around it properly still lets you abuse one of the most tyrannically heavy-handed guard counter strategies introduced in the DLC. But choosing this over the Carian Thrusting Shield means sacrificing improvements to literally everything, so just, it's good, but don't. Solution here is pretty simple. Number 33, the Greatsword of Damnation. Fuck you. I'm getting sick of this. It's a corkscrew, okay? It's a threaded screw with overly dull edges everywhere except the tip of the sword, and it deals standard damage. Do I need to get the fucking belt? Strangely enough, that's kind of the only thing I can find wrong with it. Its unique skill has a specific interaction with NPCs and player characters that makes it usable both on and offline. Absolutely fitting considering its owner was the lord of an incantation subtype that has the exact same benefits. Not one of my favorite weapons, it's really not even my favorite greatsword, but it's a weapon with functions I have respect for. I'd have a little more respect for it if its requirements actually represented its higher strength scaling, but it's a fine primary armament. Number 32, the Anvil Hammer. Being a bit on the heavy side matters very little in the grand scheme, and the benefits a weapon is capable of bringing to a build are almost always considered as a first priority. But maybe it's time to finally draw a line, because holy shit. This colossal weapon is so special that it gets its own attack scaling ID, where its physical damage scales with all 4 of the required stats, but your faith stat also influences its fire damage, which creates a pretty absurd AR on good strength faith builds. In terms of powerful slaps, this hammer is quite possibly the slappiest, but I feel like 22 in the weight department is enough that if somebody says, yeah, that's too heavy, complete and total understanding is the only respectable response. I like being able to hand out 4-digit damage on a single R1 like Oprah Winfrey hands out cars, or like Sony hands out unemployment letters. I also like not having degenerative knee problems due to the massive strain of carrying a fucking stove over my shoulder. Number 31, the Dryleaf Seal. Okay, just shut up for a minute. I'm curious as to how many people might actually be pissed off at me for putting this here. I'm willing to consider this a take of the mildly humid variety, but I have a slight suspicion that this started as an underrated seal with a comfortable niche nobody was exploring, and just way too many people tried to course correct by saying it was S tier, and it's not. I'm sorry, it's not. This is where I think it belongs, and I'm gonna explain why. It uses a scaling progression similar to the demi-human staff, where its best performance is seen on the lower half of the stat ladder, specifically between levels 27 and 40. One of the biggest reasons this works so well on the demi-human staff is because it's a catalyst you can easily get to in like 5 minutes, and the main stat requirement is much lower, giving players a very large window of optimal performance. This sort of scaling progression is not an easy sell on a post-game item. If I'm hopping into the DLC with 27 faith, that either means I'm a shitty faith build that keeps getting distracted, or I've just been passively leveling it as a substat to complement something else I'm much more comfortable with. Or I'm trying to make magma work for the 59th goddamn time. Number 30, the Cursed Blades Cirque. I'm becoming increasingly grateful this game doesn't come with a durability meter like its predecessors, if such a thing were even possible. This Cirque looks like someone flattened a Pepsi can with a hydraulic press, cut out the center of it, and then started using it as a weapon. And it somehow still gets better guard boost than at least 2 small shields in the game. If you're into guard counters but think you're also above using shields for some reason, the Cursed Blades Cirque can go surprisingly far. The unique skill might require the traffic clearance of an airplane, and I'm not crazy about the recovery time time after using it either, but it can be boosted by so many different talismans and builds that I'm willing to use it anyways. Even the kick at the end of the combo gets boosted by Shattered Stone, which is honestly just kind of impressive that they even thought to do that. Number 29, the Lizard Greatsword. I fucking hate how my character holds this thing. Don't you know that's not where you grab a lizard? Right? Like their tails pop off and grow. I'm thinking of a different animal. Wait, no, I'm not. That's right. No, someone already corrected me in the comments. Who fucking cares? Not a single person gives a shit about this greatsword, and although I can't verify that through concrete evidence, I'm going to tell you why you should anyways. The projectile it launches on a heavy attack still receives the poise damage of a regular R1, but the attack itself receives a slight penalty to its poise MV anyways to compensate for the projectile, which really only brings it up to par with charged heavies from other greatswords, and the damage unfortunately works the same way. Status, on the other hand, of course it's fucking status. That's what it always is. Status buildup receives no penalty at all on a charged heavy, which means both the charged heavy and the projectile have a status MV of 100, which is just normal status buildup. On bleed infusions, you'll be dealing 200 buildup on a point-blank charged heavy as a base, on a fucking greatsword. Number 28, the Verdigris Greatshield. It's a shield with physical AR that can keep up with most colossals, so it's already coming out of the gate swinging for its life. The 28-pound wide load you'll be carrying into the arena is a tad cumbersome, but with this much attack power, you can easily get away with just not even having a weapon in your build at all, and relying solely on bashes and counterattacks. This is still going to give you way less attack than if you were to just slap a heavy infusion on a colossal sword, but the 90 guard boost is also uncommonly strong, even for great shields. It's literally the highest guard boost you can find in the game. Maining a shield as a weapon also unfortunately leaves you without a critical hit option, but if you can clear out your pockets for 28 pounds of iron whoop-ass, I'm sure you have enough room left over for like a Main-gauche or whatever the fuck that one dagger was named. Who needs gloves anyways? Number 27, the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana. 67s in both strength and dex, making it the only quality affinity great katana, the only quality affinity katana for that matter, that starts working right out of the box just as God intended. I think the introduction of this weapon also opens up a neat little discussion about what exactly makes dragons and large enemies so gruelingly not fun to fight, because a lot of that just comes down to the game leaving the player ill-equipped. Fighting dragons is fun as fuck when you have a sword that's taller than you are and can shoot a giant wave of grenades into its face, and most other anti-dragon weaponry in the base game ironically tends to carry some other drawback that turns into a huge inconvenience when your target is a dragon. I'm sure trying to take out a stealth bomber with a pair of garden shears would be a pretty boring waste of time too. Number 26, Milady. It's infusible, it's buffable, and it comes with one of the most consistently useful weapon ashes in the DLC, so it's already miles ahead of Rellana's twin bitches despite being able to find it without downing a single boss. It's capable of a really comfortable 6-hit attack string when two-handed, building up a total of 500% status, and with attack MVs that all stay reasonably close to 100. Most of the scalings on the different affinities are dollar store pre-owned Goodwill hand-me-downs that never go above a B, but the highest scaling here is actually given to the Occult affinity, and with the 60 in the appropriate stat, it's even able to outpace the Keen affinity in damage. Number 25, the Flowerstone Gavel. Being a good casting stick that's capable of a few good tasers isn't too synonymous with being a good overall weapon in my eyes, but the gavel itself has plenty more things about it that still make it great, and I'm really only leading with that preamble because Flower Dragon Bolt is, by itself, incredibly powerful as a unique skill. The gavel deals exclusively pierce damage, which even further helps out the weapon's anti-dragon properties, but the skill itself is where things start to get confusing. The lightning damage on the skill only improves with Arcane, which is already unexpected, but having access to good lightning incantations requires a decent amount of faith, one of the only stats the weapon seems to not care about. If you don't have a Dragon Communion Seal, this pushes it in the direction of working less with lightning incantations and more with lightning affinity weapons like Bolt of Grandsax, Dragon King's Cragblade, and weapon ashes like Thunderbolt and Lightning Slash and other lightning abilities that scale only with dex. Number 24, the Death Knight's Long-Haft Axe. A lot of the top contenders usually have some hidden advantage or individual quirk that allows it to perform as well as it does. The Messmer Spear can be thrown, the Bloodfiend arm does a little goosh on the heavy attacks, shit like that. The Death Knight Long-Haft Axe heads clear in the opposite direction and becomes a cornerstone example of it. None of that, oh, the stagger value is actually 65 on this one attack if you have the fucking Boulevard of Broken Dreams equipped or some nonsense. No secrets, no dishonesty, just a straight up up warmonger with very appealing unique skill if taking an active role in the video game you're playing just suddenly doesn't appeal to you anymore. But the damage itself with basic attacks isn't really that outstanding because of the awkward damage split. Lightning damage makes up a third of its total AR, which is something I'd be okay with if the weapon had good faith scaling, but much to my surprise, it actually doesn't. Only 54 versus the 99 it has in strength. In fact, the reason the skill ends up being so strong is that the initial slam powers up with weapon level, while the follow-up lightning bolt scales with faith, and since people tend to run this as a faith weapon, the lightning bolt ends up being stupid powerful. It's still really good, it's definitely better than the twin axes, but I think it might be time to admit the unique skill has hard carried this great axe since day one. Number 23, the Red Bear's Claw. Claws and fists have exceptionally short range, but that gets exchanged for, well, just about everything else. Damage, status, the ire of half the PvP community, it's all there in a nice convenient package deal. The unique skill has a very useful perk, however, that makes up for, I don't know, like 20% of this. I'd still much rather have the claws of a bear that just never clipped his nails for range reasons, so I can solve that problem without flailing my body around like a tropical storm victim. But the shockwave produced by the Red Bear hunt does linger for a fraction of a second, and it consumes a reasonable enough amount of FP and stamina that it can be used as a main attack if you want to. The feints on Beast Claw weapons are also kinda nice, and the lingering hitbox on the skill can be used to rack up bleed status extremely quickly. Number 22, Leda's Sword. My only real complaint here is I guess someone forgot to turn friendly fire off for the ailments, because proccing a status like Rot or Frostbite and then using the skill just results in the status you inflicted being cleansed as well. Bit of a dick move, but not something you can't play around. I wasn't sure how seriously I should have taken the item description, but very seriously, it turns out. Like, do you see how important this shit is now? This is also why number scalings are vastly more preferred over letters, because it wasn't until I looked it up when I saw the sword has twice as much faith scaling as it does strength. Something I would have predicted anyways, but it's nice to see the numbers actually back it up. Number 21, Euphoria. It needs a little bit of maintenance here and there, but if you can land enough hits to properly spool up the skill, it fares pretty nicely against most standard enemies. Might have a bit of bad luck using it against DLC bosses though, since everyone here fights like they have a fucking coke problem, but I can at least say that both the twin blade and the attached skill is noticeably above average. It takes around 30 seconds for the blades to fully power back down if you don't hit anything with it, which is much longer than I was expecting. So you can put away a small enemy or something with a basic attack chain and then just hold on to the charge for a while if you don't immediately need to use it. The weapon scalings are well, they're okay, I guess. Pretty disappointing considering this twin blade is supposed to be some secret treasure fashioned from one of God's kidney stones or whatever the fuck, but I guess the attack buff granted by the luster does take care of some of that. Number 20, Messmer's Soldier's Spear. See that lance? Fuck that lance. Nice quality scaling on a great spear that doesn't even need to be infused. Base damage that could make a dragon piss its pants, weighs less than most other great spears without any expense to range or power, a 2-hit R2 that disintegrates kneecaps, occult scaling is way too good for no reason, cold infusion is also pretty strong due to 3 moderately high scalings, and it's all tied to one of the most boring, unassuming weapon designs I think Blender is capable of producing. I'm not kidding, this weapon took like 10 minutes to make. They probably made another spear, shaved off all the embellishments until there was nothing left but the uncolored model of a thin cylinder with a triangle on top, threw some recolors on it and shipped it out. And you know what? It looks fucking fantastic. Number 19, the Smithscript Shield. With the Blessed Blue Dew Talisman, 3 FP per skill becomes precisely nothing. Without any exaggeration whatsoever, you can use this skill with 3 FP left and have another one ready to go in exactly 5 seconds. You probably weren't going to do this either way, but just in case you're thinking about it, no. Those Faith and Int scalings are just scandalously bad, and so is the dex scaling if I feel like being mean. 63 strength, 27 dex, and a fucking 9 in everything else after it. Just level strength and don't worry about anything else. Discus Hurl only pays attention to weapon level anyways, so as long as you have it maxed, it doesn't really even matter. I swear I remember the stagger values being higher than this at some point, but the initial toss-up has a 1, and the tracking hit that comes afterwards has a 2, which is like barely anything. It is pretty cool that both hits can nail the same target though if you do it up close. Number 18, the Backhand Blade. You have no idea how tempting it was to just write a single sentence saying this weapon is hard carried by the ashes you can attach to it, and I think maybe like 2 people would have disagreed with me. But honestly, the more I use it, the more disingenuous I think that begins to sound. This whole weapon class might have one of the most versatile movesets on any weapon, period. Most of the 2-handed attack chain obviously involves double hits, so you should already be thinking about potential ways to use status, winged swords, godskin cloth, all the good ones. But you also have a 6-hit light string with both slashes and thrusts, and the one-handed charged heavy covers an honestly problematic amount of distance. No joke, this shit just pushes you right through the kitchen and into the sink like you slipped on a banana peel. Number 17, the Shadow Sunflower Blossom. Okay, let's see. Good scaling on 2 stats that are separate yet commonly built together. Yep. Enough AR to support both pure strength and pure faith builders. Of course. Unique R2 that feels fun and does a boat fuckload of damage. Yep. 3-hit unique skill that can crater half a town on a high faith build. Check. FromSoft's trademark approach to making weapons by pointing at random items in their office. Yep. Vitals normal. Reflexes seem fine. Alright, that's your yearly checkup. Here's your cherry lollipop. Don't forget to see the receptionist. Number 16, the Greatsword of Solitude. Absurdly good strength scaling, a skill that's more dependable than it is flashy, and more guard boost than every other greatsword and colossal sword, making it wonderful when paired with the deflecting tier. 38.5 total poise damage on the skill if both hits connect, and the wind wave on the first half has a stagger value of 3, so unless you're trying to demolish a house with wings, both hits will absolutely connect. And that A in strength is actually a 171, so just go right on ahead and consider it an S for convenience. The upfront damage on the basic attack chain rivals that of the Blasphemous Blade, and with all its damage in one place too. But colossal damage also demands colossal biceps. 15.5 pounds for a greatsword that literally weighs as much as his Vihander. That's pretty ridiculous. Number 15, Rakshasa's Great Katana. Not sure what people are talking about with the difficulty for the boss fight here. I went at her with a Godslayer greatsword and she didn't even move the entire fight. I don't know. People really out here flicking rubber bands at a boss and saying they have too much poise when they don't flinch. Anyways, there is exactly one situation where the Rakshasa Katana is outperformed by the Dragon Hunter, and that's if you've been slamming through the game on a pure strength build and suddenly decide you want to start leveling Dex instead of just using a larval tier like everyone else. On Dex builds, Rakshasa wins. On quality builds, Rakshasa wins. On every build that isn't wholly devoted to strength, Rakshasa will win, and why in the holy shit are you using a katana if you're a strength build anyways? Number 14, the Black Steel Greathammer. Unlike the Twin Blade, the Black Steel Greathammer has an extra secondary flavor to its profile, which is the burst of holy damage immediately after performing a guard counter, which I also did not think would do anything. I've been very impressed with this game's item descriptions lately. Normally this is the kind of thing you'd see on just a basic sword that hands out shit bags of holy damage just because the game said so, but not with this. Sacred Affinity will boost the damage of the guard counter's holy explosion by a significant amount, but the standard affinity also gets much more from weapon buffs like Order's Blade. Prayerful Strike is also incredibly fun to use, and even the heavy affinity still gets a massive amount of punch from it just because there's so much physical damage. As long as you even roughly know what you're doing, it's pretty much impossible to make this a bad weapon. Number 13, the Ancient Meteoric Ore Greatsword. The exact moment when it was decided, fuck it, arcane builds can just use whatever the goddamn fuck they want. This is one of the few cases where a high arcane stat can improve both the physical and magic power of the weapon, so even though this sword only climbs to 47 arcane scaling, leveling it seems to provide a total AR very similar to strength builds, even though the strength scaling is nearly twice as much. Another little piece of trivia I would have never found or had even guessed it was there if I hadn't seen it myself under the attack element correct param. I'd say thanks FromSoft in a really snarky, venomous tone, but this little bit of knowledge actually resulted in a weapon being better than I thought it was, so thanks FromSoft, how kind of you. Number 12, the Dancing Blade of Rana. Another 171 in scaling, so for all intents and purposes, just pretend it's an S and... Okay, listen, I get that you can compare two different weapons and the letter, like, turns blue if the scaling is technically higher, but I don't feel like I'm ungrateful for bitching about this. This isn't exactly the longest list I've done or anything, but I feel like I keep finding random instances where something was almost an S or barely a B. Like, fuck, man, just use numbers. I'm loath to call this a casting stick because the highlight of this entire weapon is very obviously the unique skill it comes with, but I also feel like the phrase casting stick comes with a very specifically negative reputation, even though that's like exactly what it is. There are a couple benefits here and there though. It's probably the lightest paired weapon I've ever used. It does still get slightly outperformed by a few keen affinity curve swords like the Bandit's Curved Sword and Grossmesser, but power stancing them usually means double the weight, so it may not be the more efficient option for a pure dex build. Number 11, the Sword Lance. A very unique legendary tier armament that can be buffed and infused like a normal weapon. The single feature that allowed it to become the warhorse that it is. All the status infusions receive extremely high build-up numbers and still hold on to high Bs in the strength department. The occult scaling gives it 724 AR with 80s in strength and arcane. The spinning gravity thrust it comes equipped with can make it one of the most surprising dark horse candidates in the game for dealing great status, and 174 strength scaling on the heavy affinity. Just literally one single point away from an S. Use a fucking number system. God damn it. Number 10 and 9, Dryleaf Arts and Dane's Footwork. There's a hidden strength to these weapons, which is that everything in the two-handed moveset except the very final attack in the chain hits twice. Normally, this is accompanied with vastly lowered attack MVs around 60 to 70 range, but with the two Dryleaf weapons, all attacks in the chain stay roughly around 100, with the final attack clocking in at 106, resulting in nearly twice the efficiency when two-handing, and I actually just pulled up Animation Studio. Yeah, even the final attack does technically hit twice. Like, there's two hitboxes involved, which means two attacks are being applied. So yeah, literally all the attacks in the chain hit twice. This is also a large reason why the two weapons tend to effortlessly munch up enemy poise. Even the poise MVs are different for each attack, and they're different in a way that reflects the fact that they knew they were creating a weapon that had a shitload of attacks in it. They really did try to be as careful as possible picking out the exact right numbers here, and it's still stronger than like 95% of the other shit in the game. Dane's Footwork also gets boosted by the Shattered Stone Talisman and the Divine Bird Greaves, and has the same amount of attacks and very similar MVs across the board, which just makes it an objectively better choice. Number 8, the Falx. The bleed buildup is really just a bonus, and it's not even that it's really that low, but having such a strong positive like this on a 4-pound paired weapon with a unique skill that's just hitting shit a bunch of times over and over again means status buildup starts to stack wickedly fast. Unexpectedly, the total AR only seems to take a minor hit compared to the Dancing Blade, and for weapons with innate status buildup, the gap in attack power is usually much larger. The Dancing Blade having scaling all in one place makes it much less of a hassle to build for, but the Falx feels like a better well-rounder that's able to handle itself in more situations without sacrificing anything major. Number 7, Spear of the Impaler. It's just good. I can't even think of anything else to say about it. It's just a wonderful and convenient weapon in the most straightforward way possible. You want a spear with outrageously high physical AR? Well, level Dex. You want something so hot it can singe the hairs off God's eyebrows? Well, level Faith. Faith actually ends up just barely being a better option despite its lower scaling because it results in higher overall attack power, but leveling both Dex and Faith is obviously what you should be shooting for. I see a lot of people saying this would have worked better with the standard R2 animation, and I honestly don't disagree, but the projectile range is long enough for damage fall off to really just not be a problem most of the time, as long as you're fully charging it, and it still gets boosted by the smithing talisman anyways. The flame wave on the first attack of the unique skill goes way further than I expected it to, and it comes with unnaturally strong hyper armor that makes sure whatever's in front of you gets hit by it no matter what. Number 6, Staff of the Great Beyond. Does chaining Carian Greatsword into Stone of Gurranq sound exciting to you? Have you noticed you're out of flasks and need a healing spell, but your magic shrouding tier is about to run out and you want to get one more pump out of Shattering Crystal? Just fucking do both at the same time. Who gives a shit anymore? You like throwing up failing sorceries for cover? You know how 70% of the game's incantations don't have hyper armor? Well, you're gonna fucking love this idea. The scaling isn't that outstanding. I mean, it's enough for whatever you're casting to deal better than basic damage in pretty much any situation, but 327 scaling with 60 faith and intelligence is still far from optimal. But the utility of being able to cast everything in the whole game without needing to switch to a specific catalyst is honestly, it's stupid. It's just bullshit. A lot of the best support and utility spells like the Fortification lineup or Thops' Barrier don't take scaling into account anyways, so that number is only going to matter half the time. Widening your casting repertoire to literally everything and only sacrificing a marginal amount of power is one of the strongest utilities players can get. Number 5, Claws of Night. It's a fucking claw, it's got bleed, and it has its slimy little tongue swirling around in like 20 different power pools. Heavy attacks throw the claws, so that's one ranged attack. Has Scatter Shot equipped, so that's 2, both of which deal bleed. Heavy attacks get buffed by the smithing talisman. Charging it gives it another boost from the axe talisman. It's one of the 2 night-themed weapons with an anti-block effect. It has 128 dex scaling that can improve both physical and magic, so the physical damage receives very little drop off compared to other claws, while also getting like 200 extra magic damage on the side. It's got a fucking feint for some reason, and it has the longest reach of any claw weapon by a stupidly noticeable margin. For pure dex builds, it just doesn't get any better than this, like period. Number 4, the Fire Knight's Greatsword. Sharing the same light attack chain with the Godslayer Greatsword is already a huge plus for the feel of the weapon, but it also has the flagship Zweihander patented Giga Thrust as its heavy attack, resulting in probably the most versatile moveset on any colossal sword. It comes with the same sort of buffing effect as the black steel weapons, only you apply Messmer fire grease instead of holy buffs. Slap a flame art affinity on it and it becomes the single greatest fire colossal sword in the entire selection, even beating out the Godslayer. Only thing that really comes close is the flame art greatsword, and that bitch needs 31 strength and weighs 23 goddamn pounds. Number 3, the Carian Thrusting Shield. Get the shield, take the magic infusion, and never pick up another Radahn greatsword ever again for the rest of your life. What you're looking at here is the best foundation for the quintessential bonk-telligence build, and with all the different opportunities the DLC gladly takes to enable your guard counter addiction, it's time to consider a tactical pivot. Throw away the spear, get rid of the great shield. Eve from the hit Pixar film WALL-E is here to give you both in one single asset. Normal players will get their rocks off endlessly stacking bleed status over and over again with an oversized rib bone, but true soldiers know only the hardest glory is earned through impaling fuckers with a giant detached hood ornament. With everything at 40, the magic affinity slaps. At 60, the magic affinity still slaps. 80? You fucking figure it out. This isn't even revelatory information anymore. I don't think it has been for months. Thrusting shields are just bullshit, and the Carian Thrusting Shield is the king shit of Cock Mountain. Number 2, Bloodfiend's Arm. I'm beginning to spot a semi-consistent trend here that if a weapon is ever concepted to be the body part of something, it's either destined for eternal obscurity because no one knows how it works, or it's an oppressive force of nature that still persists after like 16 nerfs. Guess which one this is? The Bloodfiend's Arm is also a case study in something that I've lately been calling hideous privilege, a scientific theory that begs the question, is there any empirical correlation between a weapon's unsightliness and its in-game power? Is a weapon predisposed to the inheritance of game-altering benefits because of its resemblance to a Cracker Barrel menu item? Well, in order to tackle such a pressing social matter, we dove deep into the parameters of the game's inner intestines. Both the charged and uncharged heavy attacks are divided into two separate hitboxes. The uncharged is capable of 70% status buildup, while the charged heavy gets pegged at 90. Sounds reasonable enough, but 40 arcane also gives the blood affinity a total status buildup of 188, resulting in the charged heavy inflicting a total of 338 buildup. A very sizable amount, but it doesn't seem like too broken or anything like that. Yeah, I don't know how to lead into this next part, so I'm just gonna skip right to the plot twist. The splash attack, it hits twice. Like, it just hits twice for no reason. 2 attacks in the same animation. 3, technically, if you're counting the actual impact of like the weapon. Guys, I think I found the problem. I think I figured it out. Number 1, the Pada. Okay. So we can all have our own opinions on this weapon, but I think it's pretty much indisputable at this point that the Qatar nerf in 1.09 has officially been retconned in what might be the stupidest way possible. The PvP experience here will have a vastly different and extraordinarily bitter taste stuck in their mouths thanks to dealing with this weapon, because some players I've learned don't like participating in the duel. Some players just want to be the ref blowing the fucking whistle. But there's something different about this one. Usually that's a PvP exclusive problem, but when you take away the one critical negative of fist weapons with no expense to damage, people aren't just gonna not find that out. Fists having shitty range is literally the whole point of fists. This weapon by itself slam dunks every other fist weapon straight into the dumpster and takes half the straight swords with it. But the poor Qatar is the real victim in this situation here. This is how I imagine it feels to work at a firm and find out the new hire has all the same specialties as you, but they're like 30 years younger. Like the Qatar just got its contract terminated or something. The only thing they really have left to do at this point is just flat out just delete the Qatar. It would honestly be stupider not to at this point. Like, don't even mention anything in the patch notes. Just wipe it from the game and have a laugh in your office when everyone wakes up the day after and sees a black square in their inventory. Holy fuck. War Thunder is free to play on PC, consoles, and mobile devices, and if you're a new PC or console player, or you haven't logged in for 6 months, you can receive a bonus pack shop that awards premium vehicles, in-game currency, and this really cool vehicle decorator. Use my link in the description or pinned comment to register now.
Bet you felt that.